On the 29th of July 1951, 77 Squadron began operating their Meteors on combat missions. The squadron had mainly been trained for ground attack and had difficulty when assigned to bomber escort duty at suboptimum altitudes. On the 29th of August 1951, 8 Meteors were on escort duty in MiG Alley when they were engaged by 6 MiG-15s. 1 Meteor was lost and 2 were damaged. On the 27th of October, the squadron achieved its first probable, followed by 2 probables 6 days later. On the 1st of December, the Battle of Sunken took place between 14 Meteors and at least 20 MiG-15s in North Korean markings, but operated secretly by the elite Soviet 176th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment, 176 GIAP. The Australians lost 3 Meteors, with 1 pilot killed and 2 captured, while claiming 1 MiG destroyed and 1 damaged. Russian records and accounts, which became public after the end of the Cold War, suggested that no MiGs from 176 GIAP were lost. RAF Meteor F.8 77-570 undergoing maintenance at Kimpo Air Base, K-14, during the Korean War. At the end of 1951, due to the superiority of the MiGs in air combat as well as the Meteor's favorable low-level performance and sturdy construction, RAF commanders had 77 Squadron return to ground attack. In February 1952, more than 1,000 ground attack sorties were flown, and these continued until May 1952, when 77 squadrons switched to fighter sweeps. The last encounter between the Meteor and the MiG-15 was in March 1953, during which a Meteor piloted by Sergeant John Hale recorded a victory. By the end of the conflict, the squadron had flown 4,836 missions, destroying 6 MiG-15s, over 3,500 structures and some 1,500 vehicles. About 30 Meteors were lost to enemy action in Korea, the vast majority shot down by anti-aircraft fire on ground attack operations. The RAF began introducing the locally built CAC Sabre powered by the Rolls-Royce Avon in 1955, which relegated Meteors to training and secondary duties. A number of Meteors would be assigned to the Reserve Citizen Air Force, while others were configured as pilotless drone aircraft or for target towing. Number 75 Squadron RAF was the last Australian squadron to operate the Meteor. Notably, it had operated a 3-unit aerobatic team, named the Meteorites. Egypt, edit. Although Egypt's first order for the Meteor was placed in 1948, the rising tension in the region led to the imposition of a series of arms embargoes. 12 FMK.4s were eventually delivered between October 1949 and May 1950, along with 3 TMK.7s. 24 FMK.8s were ordered in 1949, but this order was stopped by an embargo. A further order for 12 XIFF.8s was placed in December 1952, of which 4 were delivered before the order was cancelled, with the final 8 being delivered in 1955, along with 3 more TMK.7s and 6 NFMK.13s, all XIF aircraft. Britain had allowed the Meteor sales as part of an effort to foster and support good relations. Tensions over the Suez Canal led to arms sales being suspended once again. Egyptian Meteors participated in the fighting during the Suez Crisis of 1956, typically being used in ground attack missions against Israeli forces. In one incident, an Egyptian Meteor NFMK.13 claimed to have damaged an RAF Vickers Valiant bomber. An aerial bombing campaign of Egyptian airfields by Anglo-French forces resulted in several aircraft being destroyed on the ground. The Egyptian Air Force subsequently withdrew from combat within the Sinai region. Syria, edit. Meteors were the first jet aircraft of the fledgling Syrian Air Force. It acquired 25 of them between 1952 and 1956. Although the British were willing to supply aircraft, they did not supply combat training or radar. As Syria became more aligned with Gamal Abdel Nasser and Egypt, British support for Meteor operations was withdrawn and Syrian pilots began training with their Egyptian counterparts. During the Suez Crisis, the RAF performed high-altitude reconnaissance flights over Syria by English Electric Canberra aircraft from bases in Cyprus. Lacking radar to track the aircraft, the Syrian Air Force developed a ground spotter network that reported information by telephone to intercept the flights. On the 6th of November, 1956, a Syrian Meteor shot down a Canberra of No. 13 Squadron RAF, which crashed in Lebanon. In 1957, Syria began to replace its Meteors with new MiG-17s from the Soviet Union. France, edit. The French Air Force was keen to acquire jet aircraft as part of its re-equipment program following the Second World War. In 1953, 25 new-build aircraft were diverted from RAF orders to fulfill a French order. A further 16 ex-RAF NF.11s were purchased in 1954 and delivered between September 1954 and April 1955, these being supplemented by about 14 TMK.7s. The NFMK.11s replaced the Mosquito night fighter with the Escadre de Chasse, EC-30, serving with that wing until replaced by the Sud Aviation Vorta in 1957. Several Meteors were then transferred to ECN-1/7 in Algeria, which saw combat in the Algerian War, operating from Bonn, while others were used for training Vorta night fighter crews. The Vorta was retired from French Air Force service in 1964. 5 Meteor NF.11s were transferred to the Centre d'Essais en Vol, Flight Test Center, in 1958, where they were used as equipment testbeds and chase planes, and were later joined by 2 NFMK.13s and 2 NFMK.14s. The test aircraft were used in a wide variety of experiments, including radar and missile tests and during the development of Concorde. Israel, edit. Due to tensions between the newly formed nation of Israel and its neighbors, both sides had commenced an arms race which led to jet aircraft being vigorously purchased by various countries in the region. In 1953 Israel ordered 4 TMK.7s and 11 FMK.8s, with delivery continuing until early 1954. The FMK.8s were modified to carry American V rockets but were otherwise identical to RAF aircraft. A second batch of 7 refurbished FRMK.9s and 2 more TMK.7s was delivered in 1955. In 1956, Israel purchased 6 NFMK.13s, with 3 delivered that year, and the remaining 3, delayed by an arms embargo, in 1958. 5 more TMK.7s were later purchased. These were converted from ex-Belgian FMK.4s and were fitted with the MK.8 tail. On the 1st of September, 1955, an Israeli Meteor shot down an Egyptian de Havilland Vampire, the first jet aircraft to be shot down in the theater. The Meteor played a key role during the Suez Crisis. On the 28th of October, 1956, an Israeli NF.13 took part in Operation Tarnagol, in which it successfully located and shot down an Egyptian Ilyushin Il-14 that had been carrying several high-ranking Egyptian military officers on the eve of the crisis. The operation had intended to shoot down the Il-14 that was supposed to be carrying the supreme commander of the Egyptian armed forces, Abdel Hakim Amir. However, a different aircraft had been inadvertently attacked and destroyed instead. After deploying paratroopers east of the Suez Canal, The Israeli Air Force continued to support them on the ground, predominantly using its jet aircraft, fearing its propeller-driven aircraft would be vulnerable against Egypt's jet fighters. While initially flying combat air patrol missions, the Meteors and other Israeli aircraft could not prevent effective attacks by Egyptian aircraft on the ground forces. Israeli officers came to recognize that the Meteor was outclassed by Egyptian MiG-15s, and subsequently limited the Meteor's employment as a fighter against other aerial adversaries. Following the start of the Anglo-French bombing campaign against Egyptian air bases, the Egyptian Air Force mostly withdrew from combat in the Sinai, allowing Israeli aircraft to operate unhindered. The Mk.8s remained in front-line service until 1956, and were then used as training aircraft. The NF Mk.13s remained in operational use until 1962.